presentation. My presentation topic is lessons from early access. Since we only have 20 minutes and 8 minutes for questions, I think the questions are the best and interesting part of the whole talk. I only prepared like 16 or 17 slides, some basics that I basically learned. Okay, who am I and how to contact me? Since I already have been introduced, but I currently work as a lead producer on DayZ. I worked on mobile, Facebook, PC, console game, and I did like 6 to 7 years in enterprise. Mostly operations, so like server stack architecture and things like that. It's 11 years now and 5 titles, multiple platforms for almost every title. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, email, Facebook. I'm always available and I like to talk to people. So networking is one of the things that has really helped me over the time. So this talk is basically my experience with DayZ development. And I prepared some disclaimers that I really like to put in front of any presentation. Always question your and my perception of the topic. Don't be afraid to think for yourself and do your research. Like whatever I talk about now might be whole different level, like next month. Read, talk to people, network. I think like I learned most about development when talking to other developers, and learning from mistakes is also a good way. There's no recipe for success, and a lot can change in a really, really short time. So some really interesting stats from the early access development. There are currently around 1,248 early access titles on Steam. There are multiple titles on other platforms that are available for early access, from game preview on Xbox and games in development in Good Old Games. Currently on Steam, the estimate is about 162 millions of installs, which is a really large number, so the market is there. Now, there are questions that I would like to ask you. How many of you worked on early access games? Raise a hand if you can. So 2 people, that's not a lot. Any of you want to try and work on an early access game? Okay, 2 people, 3, that's not that bad. How many of you bought an early access game? Okay, that's better, so some experience there. Were there any you were happy with? If you can raise a hand and I can just like hear the name of the game, that might be interesting. What have you bought? Sorry? Ah, okay. Anything else? Anybody bought DayZ by any chance? How many of you played DayZ before? Like before this presentation? Oh. Ah, okay. That's not that bad. Perfect. Thank you guys. So what are the issues with early access? I think the biggest issue is perception of development time. Like a lot of the people have really like very mixed ideas about what development is and how it works. Confusion about how games are made, and investment versus collaboration. And by that, I mean a lot of the people still really feel that early access is an investment model rather than a collaboration model where people actually help us with development of the games. And the biggest question is actually who benefits from the early access, if it's a customer or a developer. Now, from that point of view, if you look at it, I find it very interesting because for us, it may enable us to do many things from different iterations, the feedback loop that is there. It basically helps us make the game more targeted against the audience that bought the early access itself. And the audience probably benefits from from actually learning about game development. But there's a funny thing there. When I was a young guy and I wanted to develop games, I didn't know anything about developing games. I really wanted something like early access to be part of game development. But my basically drive was a lot different than most other people. Most people buy into the idea of game rather than idea of making a game. And there is a big difference when you come to the communication about your early access. So the lesson number 1, technology. That's a very interesting one, especially when you work on DayZ. Technology can break you. And I mean that literally because after the experience with DayZ, you very early find out that if your original design is not aligned with the technology you have at the start of the early access, and you have to have large sweeping changes in the technology that you have to make the game possible, it's probably not a good idea to start early access. So I really suggest that you have your base tech at the release. During the pre-production, you should really consider the features that you are trying to promote to players. What's the selling point of the game? And if that selling point is dependent on a tech that you don't have, you really shouldn't have that selling point. You're gonna really cry at the end if you do that. Dependencies in those selling points and basically tech that you need are gonna stall the progress heavily. It's really hard to do those estimates, and I think when you look at all the stories on the early access development from Star Citizen to DayZ, and even some of the successful ones, it's really hard to do anything right for the customer. Lesson number 2, communication. Communication will make you cry. And I mean that, again, literally. When I read some of the stuff about DayZ, I feel a heavy burden to deliver what other people are expecting of me. And I think it's with a lot of other developers, because it's your customer and you want to make the best game possible, even for you and for the guy who's actually playing it. So the transparency is the key here. That's why we implemented the public backtracking. Basically, we have a technology called Fabricator, really similar to other backtracking tools. We have it publicly available. People can register or log in through Facebook or Google and basically put the bugs in there. One of the most important things about communication is stability and predictability. You have to have your answers prepared, and you have to know what you're actually talking about. To be stable, I mean that the communication pipelines that you use during early access should have a certain amount of stability to them. So you shouldn't post like after 2 weeks, after a month, after 3 months. You should have a stable line of communication all the time with all the customers that basically bought into your early access. I would highly suggest, which is something that I would really like to see in our game as well, ease of use in-game bug reporting. So basically have an option to report a bug in-game with the ticket and create it for the Fabricator, so a basic API within the game itself. Ease of use information that push that you can use in-game. So a lot of the people don't really are not really invested in your game enough to actually look on the website, read the Twitter, read Reddit, whatever. It's a really like small percent of the community. So having the information available in-game in any form of sense, either direct highlight from the website in an information box, or just a pop-up that sometimes appears for the customer, it's a lot better, because those are the customers who are actually playing the game and are invested heavily. I really suggest a large developer presence during the communication, so people should be invested on all parts of the company, but they should really have their answers aligned, and they shouldn't really overpromise there. So community management is a key role in early access, and I would really suggest like that is the team that you shouldn't really skimp on, ever. Lesson number 3, platform. Platforms will keep you awake at night. Consider the services offered on the platforms themselves. So even when you're looking at the technology that you want to use, or basically what game should be in the end, all of the services that are out there offer certain replacements for something that you would do yourself, from matchmaking to whatever basically you need for the game. Usually we're talking about multiplayer services. And that might actually help you with the development and lower the amount of time that you're investing in technology. So the research into the platform that you're choosing is really crucial. Be aware of the rules in place. All the platforms that I mentioned, even the 3 at the beginning, have different rules for early access. They work differently. There's different targeting, different markets, different customer. And you should really align yourself and your early access with that platform and benefit from it. Those platforms really require developer presence as well. So people should actually know that you're playing the game and that you're interested in it. So if one of our developers is actually working on DayZ and is a public profile and nobody sees that he actually played DayZ in 3 months, that might be a problem. Be cautious and, if possible, offer options. So there are different types of customers that you can reach with early access. I said about the motivation at the beginning. You can offer even different tiers on the platforms. And you should really consider that when you're preparing the early access model for your game, after the pre-production, after you considered all the risks that we're going to talk about. Pacing. That's really, really, really important. Update should be a regular thing. When people don't see updates happening on their early access project, they really feel they are losing and that they invested the money into a person who really doesn't care. So steady stream of content is very important. You should consider small pieces of content versus large pieces of content. So we can talk about large patches every 3 months or so and small patches every week. it's a good idea to have the updates open as much as you can. In Arma, we even had like daily updates. So basically, we had an experimental branch that was pushing basically the daily developer build available to players, and people were testing it out. We have a similar thing in DayZ. We have an experimental branch as well, but we do test large tech changes on experimental branch. We don't do daily updates because what I talked about before, technology can break you. The game can be in a pretty unplayable state when we replace the base modules of the game. So when we're talking about rendering, networking, just like the base things that you make the game playable, and the daily build can end up in situations where at the end of the day, it's not really something that customer is looking for. And with the motivation of our customers, it's really apparent that what the people are looking for in the game is not the actual development for the most of the time, but the features that we promised. Also, consider the player requested features. It's an important thing because the communication always works two ways, and you might not have the best ideas for the game. I understand that game development is not a democracy, but you're making the game for those people who actually bought it. So you should consider it and align on plans with them if possible, and weigh them against your plans or the idea that you're making the game for. Don't overpromise ever. You should always over-deliver if you can. It's really important because you lose a lot of customers and reputation that way. And also something that I really liked in some of the early access titles that actually came out, have something unexpected in the pipeline. When you actually end early access, and at the end you announce like, we also did a campaign. It's amazing, just like finishing line that nobody expected, and can raise the reputation and basically boost sales at the end heavily. And you can see it in some of the data that has been data mined by Steam Spy on the projects like Prison Architect, which actually had a steady stream of sales, and at the end they published a whole campaign and it jumped again. Because one of the things that Steam Spy said about 1 year ago was that the early access sales always look similar. You have a long tail, of course, but you have a spike at the beginning because people get invested in the project, and you don't get a large spike of sales at the end and finishing of the project. So having something unexpected might actually do that for you. When? That's a very, very important question that you should ask yourself. How early is early? Not too early. Have a base game loop functioning. It's really important. You shouldn't have a broken game available to a customer ever, if possible, unless you're taking technology in the hobbyist area of the experimental branch, for example. Missing content is fine. When you look at the games that are currently in early access, some of them are technology demos, some of them have just like missing levels, some of them are missing content, some of them just miss polish. There are so many examples out there where you can see the different approaches. Early access hasn't been here for a long time. It's only been a couple of years, so not a lot of it has been tested. And with the average development time of like a AAA game of, let's say, 5 years, it's really hard to see when is the actually good time to put into early access. Early access does a lot of things for you. It provides feedback loop. It lowers the risk because you actually know how many customers are interested in your game because the spike is there. So you can lower the risk for the developer. You can get the feedback loop running, and you can actually make a better game in the end. But you also have to consider all those risks associated with it that might actually break your company or break the reputation you have. Focus on stability first. Nobody's going to play a game that crashes. Nobody's going to even test it for you, or he's going to just like complain all the time. Stability is the key, and the main branch that you're making available to players on different streams, from Xbox to Good Old Games or Steam, should be stable. Like, it's really important. Be ready to drop patch early after early access actually comes out. Be transparent about your plans. You might have seen a couple of changes in different early access models that have been out there, where developers actually are learning as they go, like how they should communicate with their customers. And we're doing the same thing. It's really early still, and from the data that I was able to gather on Steam Spy and basically other data gathering sites, it's about 20% of the early access titles that have been actually released, like hit 1.0. So it's not a lot. We still have like 80% of those 1,000 titles in early access. They are not done, and it's been 4 years. So being transparent about all those things is really important for everybody, and it's going to help both you and the customer.